I'm tempted to play a little game, if I may. I'm just wondering which of these three scandals you think will be most damaging to Boris Johnson. The abject failure to reach 100,000 tests a day, which was pretty much the only thing that they were trumpeting for the whole of April. The deaths in care homes that he was utterly filleted on, and if you're being cross-examined by a lawyer, especially someone of Keir Starmer's calibre, and he knows where and when you said stuff, don't deny that you said it. Or the fact that they claim comparisons with other countries are unhelpful, and started claiming that after 7 weeks of publishing comparisons with other countries every day, and they started claiming they were unhelpful after we became the worst hit country in Europe. They were the three big hits, or have I missed one out?
No, I think you've got it all there, James. Let's start with care homes, because Keir Starmer started by asking Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, whether the government had been too slow to get a grip on the numbers of deaths in care homes and the transmission of coronavirus, not only within care homes, but between care homes. And he pointed to the fact there had been an excess of 10,000 unexplained deaths in the month of April, an increase of excess deaths in the month of April, and pointed to the fact that the government had actually, going back only to March the 12th, said that transmission was in care homes was unlikely. Now, the problem for the Prime Minister is he then denied that that had been the advice on March the 12th, but we now have the guidance, and it states the following. The guidance is intended for the current position in the UK where there is currently no transmission of COVID-19 in the community. It is therefore very unlikely that anyone receiving care in a care home or the community will become infected. This is the latest information and will be updated shortly. So that was the official advice from the government on March the 12th, hence Keir Starmer's question as to whether the government had been too slow. Boris Johnson comes back and says, well, actually, that isn't the advice. And then, of course, now Labour are circulating this key paragraph.
So it categorically was the advice. So yes. Boris Johnson either didn't know or he misled the House.
Yes, so this could come back and result in a clarification from the government, of course, when ministers make a mistake. We
had a clarification earlier this week, didn't we, about the water supply? Just remind people listening about what happened there before we crack on with the PMQs. So
Boris Johnson had said in the House of Commons that coronavirus can get into the water supply, and of course that is fake news. It can't get into the water supply. So there had to be
again either misleading the House or simply not knowing what is
the detail
going on under his own nose. I know these comparisons are often unhelpful, but could you imagine if Diane Abbott had made a mistake like that at a dispatch box? It would never ever be forgotten, would it? But most people probably aren't even aware that Boris Johnson did it. It needed to be clarified afterwards by the House of Commons. So from the care homes to
international comparisons,
yeah, why not?
Yes, why not? So up until the point at which the UK topped the grim, tragic death toll, each death and misery for the families who have lost a loved one. Up until that point where the UK was the highest in Europe, the government, as Keir Starmer pointed out, would publish during the daily briefing a series of slides. And one of those slides...
Sorry to interrupt again. Just to clarify, what you're describing happened every single day for 7 weeks.
Yes.
Every single day for every single week of these daily briefings.
So they go up on a large television screen and then they're circulated by email to journalists. And many of the slides vary from day to day, depending on what point the ministers or officials are trying to prove. But one slide was constant. It was there every day. And that was the international comparisons. And the UK, for much of those 7 weeks, wasn't at the top, because we weren't at the top. And then, of course, we started to include care home deaths and deaths outside of an NHS hospital setting. And at first it didn't happen. We were second, but then we came out top. And then we stopped publishing them when we came out top. And Keir Starmer said, well, hang on a moment, why did you stop publishing this international comparison that you had published every single day? And Boris Johnson turned around, as you heard him there in the House of Commons, and said, well, we find these comparisons unhelpful. They will be stark, but we will publish them at the very end because that would be more helpful. But Keir Starmer then turned around and said, well, hang on, it was you who was publishing them up until that point at which we came out top. So
every single day.
Every single day. So why are you now saying, we can't publish them because comparisons are unhelpful? Is it because the comparison where we come out top is unhelpful, but when we don't come out top, when we're sort of middle of the road, then it's fine to publish them?
Could it be a coincidence?
No, not really. I mean, that's the point that Keir Starmer's making. It's difficult to see how it's a coincidence, isn't it?
Well, I'm just trying to...
We come out top. But Boris Johnson didn't get drawn on whether...
It just so happened these two things happened completely independently of each other. We ended up
that is
the worst death rate in Europe, and at the same time they decided to dispense with comparisons that had previously been trumpeted every single day at every single press conference. It could be a coincidence.
Boris Johnson in the House of Commons didn't say it was a coincidence. He just ignored that point of the question.
And that brings us to the testing, doesn't it? It felt sometimes as if that was, one hesitates to pat oneself on the back too enthusiastically, but we decided not to talk about that every day on this programme because it was something of a red herring, and yet even the red herring has now gone a bit rotten for them.
So the strategy, which coincides with the easing of restrictions, is that you have this app on your phone, and they were going to test it on the Isle of Wight because it's a 140,000 population, and you put this app onto your phone, and it relies on Bluetooth, and you go about your daily business, and it registers. The app records all of the different numbers that you come into contact with within six feet of, and then you will be carrying on, and somebody might come down with symptoms who also has this app, and they take their app and they put in the fact they have symptoms. They immediately go and get a test because there's a test available, and it is found that they have COVID-19. At which point you will receive a ping on your phone to say, we can't tell you who, because of course there are privacy restrictions. Somebody you've come into contact with recently has COVID-19. Please can you then self-isolate initially, but please can you go and get a test? This was to coincide with the easing of restrictions. So the idea, it turns into this, the crude expression used in Downing Street is a whack-a-mole, where you have pockets of coronavirus, and as soon as that happens, you have the ability through this app and through a mass testing regime to work very quickly to suppress it, to find the people who've got the infection, and to ensure that they stay at home, they receive the right medical advice, and they don't carry on with their daily lives and infect others, and then you end up with a more widespread pandemic like the one that we had through February, March and April. And that was the strategy. But of course, we haven't had heard a huge amount about how it's gone on the Isle of Wight. What we have discovered, of course, is that in order to download the app, you need to have a smartphone that's at least it's not older than 3 years. It doesn't work. The app doesn't work on Huawei devices. It also drains your battery fairly quickly. And so Keir Starmer's turning around and saying, and of course we haven't consistently hit 100,000 tests a day. Boris Johnson, in response to Keir Starmer, said, well, actually, we're up to 200. We're still hoping to get to 200,000 by the end of the month. But Keir Starmer is turning around in the House of Commons, you heard him there, and say, well, hang on a moment, how's this strategy going? Where's the news? Where's the update? When's this app going to be available to everybody? When are we going to hear much more about it? And we haven't heard a huge amount about it, but Boris Johnson is insisting, James, that don't worry, this is, I think his phrase was, absolutely vital to ensuring that we can reopen the government can reopen the economy, get the economy moving again, because we have this strategy in place that should there be a small outbreak of COVID-19 in one part of the country, we can very quickly deal with it.
Thank you, Theo. Do you know, there's one other element that we should probably discuss is something that our mutual friend Jones the engineer drew attention to many, many moons ago when we had leaders' debates that had no audience in them, and he came to work the next day and he said, I couldn't tell who did well because there was no clapping or cheering. And that is relevant, isn't it, to what's going on here? Because with a few hundred people behind him baying and barking, regardless of how bad things were going for him, perhaps the impression many of the public got would be a little different, because that was just a humiliation. So
it is much easier now, and I say this just as a political editor of LBC, really, to spot the gaps in the information that's being given by the person who is receiving the question. So Prime Minister's Questions is a test primarily of the Prime Minister, And of course, we're also looking as journalists at how well the leader of the opposition does in terms of the detail, what questions they can pick up on, what bits of information are there and questionable, or what bits of information are lacking, the ability to flip between various lines of questioning during those 6 questions. And it can be quite difficult when you have, and this was the case with Jeremy Corbyn and previously Theresa May and David Cameron and Boris Johnson, when you have a huge amount of heckling, of shouting, interruptions, the speaker getting involved, it can be quite difficult to analyse exactly who's done well and who's done badly. Now, especially with something like coronavirus, it's much easier to drill into the details.